Hello, sugar dumplings. This is a very pressure-filled video that I only did last year. I didn't do one the year before, of my top 24 books of 2024. I've been working on this list for like a month, and it was very difficult to narrow things down. So what I've ended up doing is I did a top 10. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about the top 10, but I do have honorable mentions. So these are all 5-star books. No 4.5s made it. I had enough 5 stars to cover. I had like even more 5 stars that aren't going to even be in this video at all. We'll talk about those at a later date. But I did want to talk about my honorable mentions a little bit. So that's what we're going to do first. And then I'm going to take an intermission because I am cooking soup. I did not read the recipe ahead of time, and I went to make it about an hour and a half ago, and I did not know that it said that you have to simmer the broth for 2 hours. So I have been waiting to start cooking my dinner for almost 2 hours. The timer's gonna go off 15 minutes, so I want to be through these honorable mentions in that time. And then after intermission, I will come back and we will go more deeply into my top 10. When I don't know what to say, I get so cheesy. I'm very sorry. Honorable mentions, here we go. First up, this is real quick. The top 11 through 24 are no particular order. I didn't want to worry about the rankings. And then when we get to the top 10, they are in order. First honorable mention is The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. So this is probably my most recent read. That wasn't a reread because I've reread a few of my favorites just to, check that they were my favorite. I have been meaning to read this for 2 years and I should have read it sooner. Although, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I read it at the exact right time because I was tickled. I was delighted by this. I had such a good time. This is a light, You've Got Mail retelling. But you can totally, if you don't like that movie or if you haven't seen it, then it doesn't matter. This totally stands on its own. This is a very strange fantasy that's like a hybrid of contemporary fantasy with a portal fantasy with like a Western. And it's very difficult to describe, so I'm not even going to try. But basically the two main characters are Heart and Mercy is an undertaker, hence the title. And Heart is a, what do you call him? Heart is a marshal, and it's his job to go into this connecting, no baby. It's his job to keep people safe from these creatures that could come in from the portal world. No baby, no. I'm already wasting my time. Pippin, stop. To keep people safe from these creatures. Anyway, they don't like each other. And they really don't like each other. Somehow, I hate summarizing books that are weird. They become pen pals, but they don't, due to like the magic in this world, they don't know who each other are. He sits down to write a letter to a friend because he's lonely. The magic, the mail actually delivers it to Mercy. Then they strike up a friendship by mail, and they basically fall in love. But the thing I liked about this was the writing. It immediately sucked me in. I loved the characters. I loved the really, really weird world building. I loved how much Mercy loved her job and the respect and the seriousness with which she takes her job as an undertaker, and the respect that she wants to show these often nameless dead bodies that come through her undertaking business that she runs with her family. Her family was fun. There was a side romance that was really cute. I just loved everything about this. This is the first honorable mention. Next up is a book that has been getting weirdly mixed reviews from people that I follow, but I loved it. I had a great time, and that is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I was just immediately sucked in by this atmosphere of the Spanish Inquisition in Spain in the 1500s. This servant who has sort of like small magics. She does like magic with household chores, and then she's found out by the mistress of the house, and the mistress of the house decides to use her magic to try to network her way up in society, and then that escalates and things get a little dark. But I just love the atmosphere, and I don't understand people who don't like this and who find it boring, because I was riveted from page 1. It isn't a favorite, which is why it didn't make the top 10, but I would definitely read this again, and I had a great time. Okay, next up is a book that took me a little bit by surprise. I hoped and expected to like it, but I really kind of fell in love with it. And I'm hoping that books 2 and 3 in the series will make me fall even more in love, and that's Sorcery and Small Magics by Magadusi. This is a romantic fantasy. These two characters who are rivals and don't really like each other very much. They're not enemies, but they just don't get along. They're in a magic school together, sort of like a magic college. One of them is a spell writer and one of them is a spell caster, because the magic in this world means you can't do both. You can only do one. People need to work together to be able to perform magic, and they are paired up in class, and the caster accidentally puts a spell on this dude, whose name is Leo, and the other one's name is Sebastian, where Leo has to obey everything that Sebastian, like Grimm, he calls him Grimm, says. It's very much like an adult version of Ella Enchanted, but make it gay. But what really set this over the top for me was the world building. I found the writing and the characters very charming, and I was immediately engaged by them. I loved the world. I just immediately sunk into it. And then like the way the climax happens, and then just like the slow consideration of their relationship developing, like nothing happened too fast. I was satisfied by everything that happened. And I don't know, it was just very good. Hopefully books 2 and 3 live up. Next up is the only thriller, I think, on either of these lists, and that is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. This book isn't going to change your life or anything, but I just had such a fun time with it, and it's so rare that a thriller works for me on every level that I just needed to include it in my honorable mentions. A lot of the times I'm just left wanting by thrillers or annoyed by them because they solely rely on twists and they ignore the rest of what makes a story good. And this was full of stuff that makes a story good. Character work, the writing style, I just really liked it. Plus the audiobook is okay. Next up is an author you might see again on this list, hint, but this is the author's first book, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. Actually, I think she does have a book that was before this that was indie published, but I haven't read it. This is the one that brought her on the scene. This is a book that follows Gilda. She accidentally gets hired at a Catholic church, even though she's not religious. She ends up working as a receptionist for this church, and she's an atheist, so there's like a central conflict there. And she's also autistic. I can't remember. I think she does know that she's autistic. I can't remember. This one is kind of similar to the author's other books. So I do get them a little mixed up, particularly since I read them within 3 weeks of each other. She's replacing a receptionist who died, and she ends up investigating this woman's murder while working in a church while being an atheist. And it was just really delightful. There were meditations on death, obviously, and friendship and connection. It really made me excited to read all of the author's other books. Next up is the only short fiction collection on this list, and that is You Like It Darker by Stephen King. This was just a walloping success. I liked every story in this book, and I loved many of them, especially the novellas. I don't know, I can't really talk about any of them because we would be here forever, but I really enjoyed this. Nobody does short fiction like Stephen King, in my opinion. This was a really great time. Next, we're gonna have 2 books by the same author in a row. So I will just hold up both of them right now. We have Rest Stop and Mary by Nat Cassidy. Rest Stop is a novella. It is a horror novella about a guy who gets stuck in a rest stop bathroom and what happens to him. And like, that's just where it starts, okay? So I'm not gonna tell you everything about it. But this actually gets really existential and weird at the end. I've been really frustrated because I read this really early. It wasn't really marketed and people have been catching on slowly. So I was like the first person I know that read this and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, 5 stars. Watching people read it after me and not get it has been so frustrating because I loved it so much. I want people to join the party and people are not joining the party. I can't talk about it because I would spoil some stuff that absolutely needs to not be spoiled. I guess I just want more people to read this, and then if you also love it, come talk to me and we can have a party together, because there are people who range from hating it to just liking it. But I feel like I have not seen this book getting its proper due and people recognizing it for what it's actually doing rather than what they wanted it to do, if that makes sense. And then we have Mary by the same author. Objectively, it is probably a little too long, But I had such a great time and I loved the audiobook. This is about Mary, who is a middle-aged woman who is going into menopause, but some very strange things are happening to her that cannot be attributed to menopause. And then she ends up going home to Arizona. I forget why. Oh, she's fired and her rent increases to an unsustainable level in New York. So she goes back to her hometown. Her aunt actually calls her and says, hey, I need your help. I'm really sick and dying. Please come help and take care of me and I'll pay you and you can live with me for free. So she ends up going back to her hometown, but there's something really weird going on in her hometown. The weirdness that was going on was great. And I loved the way, Nat Cassidy always does this, but I loved the way that he has the supernatural elements stand in for something in the real world. Like just the way that he does that. And also the way that he's able to write from the perspective of a woman was just so, I didn't even notice it while I was reading it because I was just having such a good time. And I really love Mary. If you don't like Mary, you're not going to like this book. I had a really great time. It gets real weird. Speaking of weird, we've got Bunny by Mona Awad. I hoped I would like this, but I genuinely didn't think I would like it as much as I did. This is like a singular reading experience. My timer's about to go off. I have 2 minutes. I'm not gonna make it. This is a singular reading experience. It is not for everyone. And I feel like if you miss the central point of what's actually going on, you're either gonna be very confused and have a great time, or you're gonna not like it at all because you're not gonna understand. I wish I could tell you more. I will link my vlog down below where I read this because I go into spoilers and I spoil the whole plot if you're curious. But if you're at all wondering about this book and you think you might want to read it, I would suggest going in not knowing anything. Now, I'm a hypocrite because I was spoiled for part of this stuff, and actually the stuff that spoiled me made me want to read it. So maybe don't listen to me. Maybe spoil yourself a little so you know what's actually going on, so you can make yourself be intrigued for it and then come back and read it, because I had a great time. Now, this is a book that has been really not been talked about this year, and I think that's a shame. Thought there's other new release got more buzz around it. People were reading it more than this one. Maybe it's because that was a standalone and this is a sequel. But I think this book deserves to be talked about more, and I think that it was an extremely successful end to a series, and that is The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. This was the perfect end to our lovely Jade's story. I really need to reread it because I sort of listened to it in like a frenzy and nothing really about it except for like a bear stuck. And I really want to take my time and reread all three of them and consider them and spend time with them. And I really think this one in particular will really do it for me when I do that. But yeah, I think more people need to be talking about this book. It's really not been getting a lot of love, so I wanted to give it some. And then real quick, because my buzzer is going to go off any second now, 10 Things That Never Happened was one of my top romances of the year, just a pure romance. This is a book about Sam and Jonathan, and Sam works for Jonathan. Jonathan owns a series of three chain stores that are essentially bed and bath superstores in England, and Sam manages a branch, and his branch is not doing well because he's a little bit of a pushover. He doesn't want to fire. Okay, hold on. I didn't make it. Okay, so I'm gonna finish up these real quick, cook, and then come back. His branch isn't doing well, and Jonathan, everyone hates him. Everyone views him as cold-hearted. Everyone at his branch calls him his royal dickishness. He's called to London to get a talking to, basically shape up, or this is what's going to happen. And he threatens to fire people, including Sam. And then there's an incident in a showroom and Sam is injured. And when they get to the hospital, Jonathan's freaking out because it happened on company property and it involved him. So he's paralyzed with fear that he's going to be sued by Sam. And then jokingly, he comes into the room. He starts saying Sam, are you okay? And then he says, he doesn't finish his thought. He says, who are you? And he was going to finish that up with, who are you? And what have you done with Jonathan Forrest? Implying that since when do you care? But he only gets the who are you part out, and everyone in the room assumes he has amnesia. So he goes with it because he wants to find a way to save his branch and not have to fire his employees or lose his job. And he ends up staying with Jonathan, who is petrified of being sued. Now, Alexis Hall makes this very silly, very implausible premise work completely. And part of it is because this book is so funny, so you're sort of willing to like just go with it, but also because it's psychologically believable the way that he makes it happen. I highly recommend doing the audiobook because Will Watt is fantastic. I did listen to this twice this year. Maybe next time I read it, I should read it with my eyeballs. The audiobook is fantastic. I mean, I read this in February the first time, but it's also a Christmas book. It's set at Christmas. Like, you don't have to read it at Christmas because it's not a Christmas book, but it has Christmas vibes. Anyway, whatever. It's delightful. This is a true enemies to lovers. So if you like that dynamic, like, they really do not like each other. It is frankly miraculous the way that Alexis Hall makes them get to know each other and fall in love. And then last honorable mention is Time of Iron by, I can't believe I just did that. This book is not Time of Iron. Time of Iron is the fake book. I should have just gone with it. This is the fake book within the book Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan. See, Long Live Evil. I am reading this right now because I love it. So that's why it's out. And I didn't remember where I put the dust jacket. And this is gorgeous anyway. Here is the real cover. I just love this book. This is a meta, silly, goofy, campy, fun time. But it also has like a core of real emotion. The main character is dying of cancer. She's a very young woman. She's about 20. And she's dying of cancer when this woman comes to her hospital bed in the middle of the night and offers her a second chance at life. She says, you can go into the pages of your favorite book series, and if you bring me back this flower that only blooms at midnight one night of the year, you will be cured and you can live out the rest of your life. And if you do not bring me back the flower, you will never wake up. So she's dropped into the pages of her favorite book series, and she is dropped into the body of the villain here. And so she has to navigate like what she remembers of the plot. She's changing the plot as she goes. And then the characters, my favorite part of this is the in-book characters also get POVs, and watching them react to her and having no idea the context for her behavior is hilarious. And I mean, people say this all the time, but it's like a love letter to fantasy. If you don't like campy stuff, if you don't like self-referential stuff, you're probably not going to like this. But I had an absolutely great time. And the ending of this book, let's just say I want book 2 right now. All right, so those are my honorable mentions. It is time for an intermission. I'm going to go cook dinner and eat it, and I will be back soon. I made dinner, it was delicious. I forgot 2 books. So these are digital, which is why I forgot. So real quick, so I can get to my top 10. First one is The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein. I read this like the first week of the year. It was such a good listen. It's about an Australian woman who is a trauma cleaner, and it is a part biography of her and part like exploration into what she did. And she was basically a really complicated lady, but what I loved about the book is that the author's voice was so compassionate, and she got to know the woman whose name I'm forgetting. I'm sorry. I wasn't prepared. Anyway, she was so compassionate to her. I don't know. I just really liked it, and I highly recommend it. And then the other one that I forgot was Paladin Strength by T. Kingfisher. This is the second book in the Paladin series. I don't remember the name of it. Saint of Steel, I think, which is a book about this order of paladins whose god dies. We follow them afterwards as they like pick up the pieces of their lives and their romances and their fantasy. This particular one was about a paladin who falls in love with a shape-shifting bear nun. And it was great, and I loved it so much. Now we're doing top 10. Number 10, remember these are in order. So this is number 10, is Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is my new favorite Emily Henry book. I enjoyed it so much. I meant to read it before the end of the year again, but I didn't quite get around to it. So I think I'm going to revisit it in January. Not only because I loved it so much, but also this will be the first Emily Henry that I've reread also, but because one of my in real life book clubs picked it. Anyway, I love this book so much. So this follows Daphne and Miles, and they have just recently been broken up with by their significant others. Peter and Petra. He was dating Petra. She was engaged to Peter. She moved to this new town, new state with him, made him her whole life. And then his best friend was Petra, and he swore up and down they were just friends. And then he goes to his bachelor weekend, and he comes back and he says, just kidding, I'm in love with Petra. We're getting married, and we need you out of the house within 48 hours. But she has nowhere to go. So she goes to Petra's now ex, Miles, and they move in together. And it's them getting to know each other and recovering from their breakups and learning to be on their own. And also they fake date a little bit because they want to make their exes jealous because they were dick bags. I just loved it. And like that all of that was fine. But my favorite part of this was Miles. He was so funny and charming. And basically, if you ever watch New Girl, he is Nick Miller. He's Nick Miller, basically, with like small differences. I love Nick Miller and I love Miles, so I'm really not surprised. I don't really have much to say because it's been so many. It's been 100, at least 200 books since I read this. So I don't remember details any longer, but I loved it. And I also loved, she makes a friend named Ashley in the new town, and they're both librarians. It's like the first Ashley I've ever read in a book that was good and cool. And she named her son Mulder. And I'm like, how, this is awesome. This is my 10th favorite book of the year, funny story. Next up is a book that super surprised me. I didn't think I was going to give it 5 stars, let alone have it be in my top 10 books of the year. Now, keep in mind, I have read 397 books this year, which is a new record. I'm not going to get into that here. I did read all of them. Now, that is including DNFs, though. I had a lot of DNFs, and I count DNFs, unless I only read a couple pages. But I usually try to get at least 10% in, and then I DNF. But point is, I read a lot of books this year, and the fact that this one made it to number 9, it still kills me because I avoided it actively for years. And that is Kevin Wilson's Nothing to See Here. So this is a literary fiction novel, but it does have a speculative element. It's not magical realism because that has a tradition that this just doesn't take part into. I guess you could call it fabulism. This is about a woman who had a friend in high school. They went to boarding school together, and she was one of those friends that you would do anything for, but they had a falling out. I'm not going to go into that. Long story short, this woman, Madison, has children. She has her own child, and then she has 2 stepchildren, and she's married to a man who is a senator who's gonna probably run for president, and she's very into her image. And it turns out that this man's children, her stepchildren, their mother has died recently, but they have this problem where they spontaneously combust and light themselves on fire. So that is not a metaphor. I mean, the fact that they do that at all is a metaphor in the book, but inside the story, it actually happens. They actually light themselves on fire. So Madison asks Lillian, the main character, to come and help her to take care of these children. Lillian is alone. She doesn't have a lot of people or good connections in her life. And in fact, Madison royally screwed her over in high school, basically paid her family off to take the blame for something that Madison did. And therefore Lillian was kicked out of this school that would have changed her life, the course of her life. She would have gotten into a good college and gotten a different job. And now she's living paycheck to paycheck. But she takes it very seriously, taking care of these children, and not just the fire thing, but she actively wants to get to know them and help them and see them and take care of them and love them. So this had everything that I love. It had weirdness, the kids lighting on fire was never not funny, but it was also never not sad. And then their relationship was so heartwarming. And then the ending and what ends up happening to the whole family, I don't know. I just trust me, even if you don't normally like lit fic, this is a great time, and I can't wait to read it again. Number 8, also a book I wasn't sure I was going to like. We read it for my In Real Life book club in August, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. It was such a good book, and that is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. So this is a book that takes place in the 60s, or is it the 70s? 70s. This takes place in the 70s. It is a fictionalized account of Ted Bundy's last killings, except it is told from the perspective of a person who witnessed and was affected by the attack that he did in the sorority house in Florida. And Ted Bundy is never named, and that's very important. I will no longer say his name, but I did want to bring that up so that you had context. He is called the defendant throughout the book. So this takes place over 2 timelines, basically. The first timeline is Pamela, who is the witness who sees the defendant leaving the house after he has brutally attacked her sorority sisters, and the fallout from that, and she ends up going to the trial, and she's a witness. The other timeline is this girl called Ruth. Basically, we see her living her life before she meets the defendant and what happens to her. These 2 women, the stories connect, and it was so good. Like, the way that it talks about the way that our culture is so patriarchal that we are even willing to venerate serial killers is wild. Like, this book's sole mission is to obliterate the image that Ted Bundy has held on to 50 years after, well, he died. I can't remember exactly when. I think it was in the 80s. He had many appeals. But 50 years after he committed his crimes, he still had the image of being charming and smart and cunning. He was none of those things, this book argues. He was just an ordinary man who hated women. Due to other things, like the system propped him up as those things. So I really loved this book. The way that it grounds the women's stories over his was very satisfying, and I will absolutely be reading this again. Now, number 7, I'm cheating a little bit, but I don't think I'm actually cheating. I have a justification for this. This is actually 5 books. There's 7 books out in the series right now, but I've only read the first 5, and that is Dungeon Crawler Carl. Now I have the other 2 books here. I have Carl's Doomsday Scenario and the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, but I will just be holding up Dungeon Crawler Carl. So the reason I say that all 5 of these books are my number 7 is because it is just one continuous story. It's very serialized. The books are structured around the different levels of the dungeon that Carl and Donut, the talking cat, are going through. But in many ways, it's just one long story. I'm experiencing the story as a whole. I became obsessed with this series this year. I read this book and really liked it. And then after I read this book, I was like, oh no, I really like this. And then after Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, I was like, oh shit, I'm obsessed. This is eating my brain. What this book is about, if you haven't heard me talk about it before or heard anyone else talk about it, this is a lit RPG, which is a role-playing game. Lit RPG is like a nerd genre for those who wish to experience a story in the form of like a fake game, like where you basically watch as somebody else plays a game and levels up. This book takes that like a step farther. So the premise here is that Carl, who has just recently broken up with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend is in a Caribbean island somewhere with the guy that she cheated on him with, but he's still got Princess Donut, his ex-girlfriend's cat, and he's taking care of her. And so one night, the cat that lives next door comes over to taunt Donut from a tree, and Donut escapes. So Carl has to, he's just wearing boxers and a t-shirt. So he puts on a jacket, and he's not even wearing shoes. He's just got a jacket, underwear, and a shirt, and he runs outside to get Donut. And while he's outside, the aliens come. And the aliens flatten every building on the planet simultaneously. Anyone not inside of a building survives, probably. And then these holes in the earth open up, and a voice atones from the heavens and explains to the survivors of humanity, that Earth is now destroyed, and it belongs to, the aliens, and that there has been a dungeon created underneath the earth, and if they go into the dungeon, they are consenting to play the game. Otherwise, they have to take their chances on the surface with nothing. So Carl and Donut go into the dungeon, and what they find there is basically a televised reality program blasted out to the universe, where humanity fights against each other to go down levels in the dungeon and win and gain points and level up and get followers. And it's a satire of social media culture and of political systems and just a whole bunch of other things, but it's also a really fun read. It's funny. The characters are great. It's got some really deep emotional moments, and also it's really fun because it's a game. And we watch Carl and Donut level up, and that is satisfying. And Donut, by the way, levels up in the sense that she becomes a sapient being and now speaks and is her own person. And the character growth that this animal experiences from the beginning of this book to where I'm at now, just about to start book 6, is phenomenal. She is my favorite new character of the year. Carl's pretty close. I love Carl, but Donut is the best. If you haven't read this series and you like genre books, you like weird books, you like books about games, you like satires, check this out. Okay, so next up is my number 6. I already talked about this author earlier, and that is Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austin. So this was her newest release. I'm about to get her really newest release, We Could Be Rats, in the mail any day now. But this was released last January, and this is a book about Enid. And Enid has some pretty severe trauma in her past, and she's just coping, basically. And the way that she copes is that whenever she gets anxious or nervous, she just starts spouting off facts about space. And she also pushes people away. She keeps walls around herself. She's a lesbian, and she's also autistic, but she doesn't know she's autistic yet. She gets diagnosed in this book. That's a spoiler, but I feel like you should know going in. It's a very important part of her character and like the way that she processes the world around her. Her special interest is space. That's why she knows so much about it obsessively. Does she work at NASA? I can't remember. Hold on. Am I making that up? I can't remember. But she also has this phobia of bald men, which is like, I'm beginning to, I mean, I always knew this about myself, but the books that I love the most fiercely are the ones that are many things at the same time. So like the thing about her fear of bald men is it's really funny, like, because it's really dumb to be afraid of bald men. But at the same time, while it's funny, you're also recognizing that there's something very deeply sad about it because it's coming from a real place and you find out where it's coming from. So the fact that it can do both of those things with the same device is my favorite. Where she ends up at the end of this book is so heartwarming. I teared up. I didn't, quite cry, but I got really emotional for her, and like just knowing that she's in such a better place at the end of this book than when she started. It's so heartwarming. I love Enid so much. I wish the best for her, and you guys should check this book out. Okay, next up, number 5. So this is my top 5. This is a book that I did not see coming. It sounded like a really fun premise, so I said, hey, I'll just give it a shot. And then I was instantly obsessed with it, and that is Margot's Got Money Troubles. So this is a general fiction book about Margot, who is a 21-year-old who was in community college. And then she has an affair with her professor, who is kind of a dirt weasel. He redeems himself. But anyway, she has an affair with her professor, and she gets pregnant, and he's like trying to pressure her to have an abortion. And she just decides that she doesn't want to be told what to do. She wants to have the baby. So she has the baby, and then she realizes that was a huge mistake because the baby, as much as she loves him, has ruined her life. She has no money. She has no way to take care of him. So she starts like looking around for ways to make money. And first of all, she and her father, who is a ex-professional wrestler, and then after he was a professional wrestler, he managed wrestling. So he's pretty famous. His name is Jinx. He's going to be played by Nick Offerman in the movie, apparently, which is not at all how I pictured him while reading, but I kind of love it. Jinx and she were estranged because she was the product of an affair herself, and he had like a primary family. He just didn't do his duty by her. But now he has really stepped up for her, and he actually moves in with her to help her take care of the baby, whose name is Bodhi. And then the other thing is she gets the idea from him because he has a friend who has an OnlyFans account. So she's like, well, what if I started an OnlyFans? And so she starts an OnlyFans. So it's like this sort of coming of age tale, but it's also like very pro sex work and very pro loving and supportive family, and like just the way that she builds relationships and finds her own way is so lovely. And plus it was funny. It was like there were parts of this where I was just laughing so hard. The professional wrestling thing, like her dad ends up like helping her with the business side of it, and she ends up taking his tips from professional wrestling. and using that to make her OnlyFans successful. It was just delightful. I don't normally like literary fiction, contemporary fiction, but this was so well done. It's easily going to be like, I could see upon rereading it being a favorite of all time. So yeah, Margot, check her out. Number 4, this is a book I've now read twice this year because I read it first in audio in July. I had an ARC, and the audiobook is amazing. If you love audiobooks, do that first. But then I reread it in December just to see, if it was really that good. And it really is. And that's Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. So this is a comedic, satiric horror novel about Misha, who is a screenwriter. And he made his name in writing queer horror films. Now he is running a paranormal supernatural television show on like a CW equivalent network. And his 2 main characters are women, and he has not so subtly been building up to this moment where they're going to confess their love for each other and kiss. So he's called in, the book starts where he's called into a meeting with the network executive, the president, about the future of the show. And he's a little nervous because he can sense some things off. And weird stuff starts happening on the lot even before he gets into the meeting. And then when he gets in there, they tell him, you have to kill your characters. The algorithm has told us, the board has done the research, the numbers say that you need to kill these characters. And so he's like outraged. The title, Bury Your Gaze, comes from a trope in fiction where gay people are used as fodder for emotional reaction and they're not treated as full human beings or allowed to have other endings of joy or sadness or melancholy or bittersweetness. They're just killed. He refuses. And the exec says, all right, then you're out of a job and we will hire somebody. I'll give you a week to decide for sure that's what you want to do. If that's what you decide you want to do, then you're out and we'll hire somebody else to kill the character. So he has to go away and decide what he wants to do. And he's pretty sure he's going to kill them anyway and just take what happens. But before he can even make a move to officially tell anyone, he starts being haunted by apparently the characters that he has created in his horror movies. It is wild. Chuck Tingle has a gift. Not only is his brain like crazy smart and he's very funny and quick, but he has a gift for creating horror monsters that are truly at the same time scary, but also original and thought-provoking. I loved every second of this. And then not to mention, there is a significant moment involving an asexual character in here that just, thank you, Chuck. Thank you. I haven't seen too many people disliking this. I mean, I guess if you don't like stories about Hollywood, you might not like it, but I feel like it even transcends that. It's my number 4. Chuck Tingle, what are you going to do next? Now we are in the top 3. This is a book that I just knew I was going to love from the moment I saw the cover and I read the premise. And I was 1000% correct. All-time favorite. Will read again and again. And that is Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. He is the king. John Wiswell is the king. I have crowned him king. This is a cozy horror romance fantasy involving 2 women who are basically asexual. And the author is asexual, so that makes sense. It's a book about a monster named Secession, and she's basically a lump that lives in the middle of the forest, and she doesn't have anyone else. She's alone. She just operates on instinct, and she eats when she's got to eat, and what she eats is people and animals, and she also has the ability to take like bones and metal and wood and all that stuff and like incorporate it into her body and like shapeshift. One day she is attacked when she is hibernating at her home in this abandoned castle cave thing. She ends up killing the guys who are coming there to hunt her because they're trying to kill her. So it's like self-defense. They came looking for her. Something, I can't remember, something about that encounter makes her push out into the world, into the town. And then she meets Homily. Oh, that's right. She's injured. She goes to the town and then she's chased down and injured. And Homily rescues her and nurses her back to health, and they fall in love. And it is so adorable. But the thing that I love the most about this is the writing. It's so funny. This is like one of the funniest books I've ever read in my entire life because it's weird, it's gross, and it's sweet. Like so sweet, heartwarming sweet, all at the same time. The main thrust of this book is that Secession has to learn how to be a person and get along with other people. And the metaphor of building the nest, like that's how she was born. Like her mother laid a nest inside of a man, and she was born eating his flesh. And so she's having these biological urges to do the same thing to Homily. And so she has to learn not to do that. And then Homily has been in an abusive relationship with her family for her entire life. And so her journey is sort of to come out from under that. The metaphors that John Wiswell uses to do that were so affecting. And then all this weird stuff is happening. Like I was just looking for a line and I remembered the line about Secession is poisoned. So she like makes a sack and then like sequesters the poison in this sack and then moves the sack through her body where it is discreetly shitted out into her boot. Like just that kind of stuff. It's so weird and it is so delightful and heartwarming and lovely. I will follow this man anywhere. I will buy this book and thrust it upon you. I will read his next book, which has been announced. And I'm so into it. I'm so into it. I cannot recommend this highly enough. All right, we only have 2 more. My number 2 book of the year, should have seen it coming because it was written exactly for me. It is a Sherlock Holmes pastiche-ish. You know, like it takes the character archetypes and plays with them. It is queer. It is an epic fantasy, high fantasy. There is a murder mystery. And I think you know what book it is if you've been paying attention to me, and that is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the first book in a trilogy. It's an epic fantasy series that will have at the center of the plot a mystery, because the main character, Anna Delabra, is an eccentric genius. And her thing is that she doesn't even have to go to the crime scene to solve incredibly complex mysteries and crimes. She has Din, who's the main character, and he is an engraver, which means that he can engrave in his memory. He has the ability to engrave in his memory exactly. He can remember anything and everything in perfect detail. And he does that using scent recall. So like when he's about to start remembering, he'll like pull out a specific scent and sniff it and then start engraving. And so later when he wants to perfectly recall everything that he saw so he can relate it back to Anna, he just pulls out that same vial and then he can instantly be transported into that memory. He's only been with her for 3 months. He's basically her apprentice, her assistant. If somebody dies, they're found with a tree, like a full-on tree growing from their body. So he's sent to examine the scene of the crime and interview witnesses. So that's how the book opens, with him doing that. And then you're like, where's the detective? She's at home wearing a blindfold being a weirdo. It was just so much fun. And then like in the background, I'm sure we're going to get more of this as the books go on. This was very like, almost standalone-ish, so that you could just get to know the world and the characters through the plot and the mystery. But I think we're going to be getting more of the world and the overall politics of what's going on and the dire threat, which is there are these Leviathan kaiju creatures that are coming from the sea and are a huge threat to the civilization that these people live in. Overall, everything about it was amazing. And then when you put it all together, the author, Robert Jackson Bennett, who I love, he just balances it all perfectly. I am going to reread this pretty soon because the next one's coming out April 1st. And you bet I will be buying that on release date. I don't know if this is a book that everyone will love as much as I did, because there are so many things in it that I personally froth at the mouth over. But I think you're going to have a good time no matter what. Tainted Cup, number 2. And with that, we have reached my number 1 pick of the year. This is a book that I absolutely did not expect to love as much as I do. That's a recurring theme with the books that I love. I am not great at picking out which ones are going to bowl me over. I'm good at knowing which ones I'll like, but the ones that go the extra step into this means a lot to me, if you come at it, I will come at you territory, that I'm terrible at predicting. This book, I just reread it also, and it was even better, and it hit me even harder than it did the first time when I read it in February, and that is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. This is a historical fantasy book involving a nurse, a Canadian nurse in World War I. She has been injured and validated out. She's been sent home. But then a ship explodes in Halifax Harbor and her entire family is killed and she's traumatized. And then at the same time, her brother is missing. Her brother's a soldier in the Canadian Army and he goes missing. And she sent a mysterious package, and they said he was missing in action, meaning they never found a body. But somebody sends her his tags and his cloak and a postcard that has a mysterious message on it. Her landlords, who are these 3 older women who are pretty obviously a mythological manifestation in the real world of some sort, they do seances and they tell the future. They tell her basically that her brother is alive. So she goes back. She goes back to, are they in Belgium or are they in France? I think they're in France on the border of Belgium. Passchendaele Ridge, I don't know how to say it, is the battlefield where they're at, or the hospital is. On the France-Belgium border, the Battle of Passchendaele. I don't know if I'm saying that right. So that's her journey. She goes back to try to look for her brother. Meanwhile, her brother is alive, but he was trapped inside of a German pillbox, which I guess were these structures that the Germans set up instead of encampments and trenches. They were like actual physical structures. And they're trapped inside of one after a bombardment. And he's trapped with a bunch of dead bodies and a very alive but severely injured German named Winter. The stuff that these 2 men go through together, the trauma, but as they go through the battlefield, like just you can see the devastation and the horror of war and what it does to these men. This is probably the best depiction of war-induced trauma that I've ever read. More importantly, but I don't think I would have loved it or given it as much praise or had it stick with me as much if it wasn't for this other thing that I want to talk about, which is that this is a book about the end of one age and the beginning of another, and how change can be traumatic and terrifying. When the world changes, some people are left behind, and some people can move forward. And what happens to the people who can't move forward? I don't know. It's just like a beautiful meditation. And like famously, World War I is like a turning point in Western civilization for technology, but also for social attitudes. And like there's a character in here who is very stuck in the past, and she still wears her hair old-fashioned like women did before the war. She wears long skirts. She frowns on all of the nurses in the war who hem their skirts to their knees. And then these other characters are like, none of that matters anymore. That's the old world. The new world, you can do whatever you want. Here's the one I was thinking of. It's all right. Manners are going to be a casualty of this war, along with corsets and long hair. You're a relic, my beautiful Penelope. Never change. Ivan's a modern creature. She's not offended. And then the other thing is there is this character named Fallon, who is the fiddler. There's this rumor that if you find him, he can give you solace. And all of the soldiers who have met him are obsessed with him, and they keep trying to find him again, but you cannot find him. All of this stuff comes together, and it's so beautiful. The way that this was so devastating, and like the end of these people's worlds, like everything was ending. It feels almost apocalyptic because even though I know how it turned out and that we're still here 100 years later, these characters do not know what's going to happen, and it feels like the end for them. And then the way that turns and is born into something new is just so beautiful. I love it so much. I'm not going to be able to talk. I read it twice and I still can't talk about it. I highly recommend it. There is a lot of battlefield stuff on here though, so if that's something you're sensitive to and like medical trauma, it might not be the book for you, but it's just so lovely and devastating and beautiful, and I love it so much. And that, my friends, is it. That is my top 10 plus my honorable mentions of 2024. I hope you all had a good new year, and I wish you nothing but good food and 5-star reads. Well, no, I don't wish nothing but 5-star reads for you. You know what? If every book was a 5-star read, the 5 stars wouldn't feel so special. Those last 10 books that I just talked about for 40 minutes would not feel so special if every book was amazing. So I wish for you mostly normal reads with the occasional bursts of color and pleasure and happiness and dopamine that a 5-star will bring you. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I hope you stick around. If you liked the video, please don't forget to give it a like and subscribe if you want to. If you don't have anything to say about any of these books that I've just talked about, then feel free to just leave me a violin for The Warm Hands of Ghosts. Feel free to tell me also your favorite books of the year. And I will see you guys in the next one, which will be my worst books of the year, which actually there aren't that many of them because I'm really good at picking books, and also I'm really good at DNFing books now. So I don't even know what that list looks like at this moment, but I'll see you then. Okay, love you, bye.